In the last video, I mentioned that classes and objects are fundamental to Java, and indeed. In this video, we're actually going to design a class that represents a point object. So remember last time we said that there are a couple different ways we can represent points, but they all have some sort of issue, okay? So what we're going to do, we're going to create a class, and the way to do that is you're going to click on this, you're going to right click on this source folder, hit new, hit Java class, and we're going to call this class point. Okay? So what is a point? A point is something that contains an x coordinate and a y coordinate, right? So that's, or at least that's what we're going to say it has. Okay? So how do we specify that this class, that a point, has something, or has these two things, these two attributes, an x coordinate and a y coordinate? Well, what we're going to do is we can just say int x, int y. Okay? And this says that point has two coordinates, or two values. These things are called instance variables. Sometimes they're called fields, sometimes they're called attributes, all the same thing. Okay? But the main thing here is that they are instance variables, and we'll talk about what instance means momentarily. But yeah, so we now say that a point has an x coordinate that is an integer and a y coordinate that is an integer. Okay? So over here in the classes example, what I'm going to do is create an instance of the point class. So the way to do that, and we've done this before, right? We would say something like point p, and by default, this is going to reference null. Okay? Because there's nothing assigned to it, right? We only have point p. We're just saying that that p is a point. We haven't done anything with that yet. So if we try to do, well, actually, let's just finish this. So how do we say that p is a new point? Well, we just say p equals new point. So this is what's called, or rather, well, yeah, so this whole thing is what's called instantiating an object. And we've seen this before, right? We say that whenever we use the new keyword, we are instantiating a new, what's called an instance or an object that is a point. Okay? So what exactly does that do? Well, it means that we can now access these x and y variables associated with a point. So let's say we want to make the x coordinate be 3 and then the y coordinate be 4. The way to do that is we're going to access them through this little what's called the dot operator. Okay? So we're saying p and then dot, and then this will give you a bunch of things that we'll talk about later. But for now, we want to say that we want the x coordinate of this point to be 3 and the y coordinate to be 4. Okay? And from there, let's just print out, let's say we want to print out the sum of these two values. So we can do p.x plus p.y, and then if we run this, this of course should be 7 because it's saying that we're getting the x and y coordinates of p, and we're just summing them. Okay? So the thing is, what we've done, well, actually, let's back up and let's see what would happen if we didn't set these to 3 and 4. This is going to output 0, and the reason why is because Java will default initialize all instance variables to their default values. Okay? So for integers, that would be 0. For booleans, that would be false. And then for all objects, that would be null. Okay? So what this means is that the constructor, so actually I haven't, sorry, let me back up one more time. What we're doing when we're saying new point is that we are creating an instance of point, and we're doing that through something called a constructor. A constructor, as you might guess, just creates an instance of a class. Okay? And all classes in Java have what's called a default constructor. And what that means is this is just some way to create an instance of point without doing anything in particular. Okay? So what would be kind of nice is if we didn't have to specify p.x equals 3 and p.y equals 4. Okay? Maybe it would be nicer to say, why not just pass 3 and 4 directly to the constructor, and somehow that gets assigned inside of this class here. Somehow doing this will assign p.x and p.y to be 3 and 4. And the way to do that is we're going to define our own constructor. Okay? So the way to define a constructor, like we said, is a way of creating an instance of a class, and the way to do that is we're going to say the name of the class, and we're going to pass in the parameters that we want to assign. Okay? So these are the two parameters that we want to assign, and now you see that this compiles. But the problem is that if we do that, it's still going to be 0, because we haven't done anything with this x and y. A constructor, at the end of the day, is just like a fancy method. Okay? It's a fancy method with no return type, or at least no explicit return type. Though it's a little disingenuous to say that it doesn't have a return type, because the return type is just the class itself. It's just that saying that this method is called point and it returns a point, that's redundant, right? That doesn't make any sense. Okay? So what we want to do is say that we want to assign these two parameters over to these two instance variables. So one thing you might think to do is say x equals x and y equals y. But of course, even IntelliJ is going to say that this doesn't make any sense because you're trying to assign the same variable to itself. And indeed, when you say x equals x and y equals y, these x's reference, or these two variables, x and y, reference the parameter. And the question is, how do we tell Java that we want to reference these x's and this x and this y rather than the parameters? Well, we can do that by saying this dot x equals x and this dot y equals y. Okay? Now, another thing you could do is just change the name of these variables. Right? We can say x and y, capital X, capital Y, and then it would work no problem, because then there wouldn't be a name clash. Okay? But if we do that, then everywhere we reference x and y, we would have to change their name. Okay? So in the next video, I'll talk about something called encapsulation, which will fix this issue, and it will give rise to this notion of keeping everything what is called localized or privated into a class.